Hey everybody, it's Dale Hart Jr., and Nationwide is proud to be sponsored by the Farm Bureau in your state. And did you know Nationwide is the #1 farm insurer in the U.S.? Being number one allows Nationwide to provide products and services to meet the needs of the farmers of all sizes and types. They understand agriculture and can help protect you from the evolving risk of farming today and tomorrow. Get a quote today through a farm certified agent by going to farmagentfinder.com/Farm Bureau.
We just appreciate the Ohio Farm Bureau Nationwide for sponsoring some of these sessions here on the Ask the Expert stage. And I think it would be an understatement if we didn't say that 2020 has caused some stress in folks all across this country. Of course, our farm community, we've been talking about farm stress now for 2 to 3 years based on some of the stress that we've been going through at the farm level. So it's great to have our next session, Farm Stress, Finding the Sunshine in the Storm, talking about farm stress with OSU Extension Educator Sarah Nagel. And just want to remind us, folks are logging on here, if you have a question for Sarah, don't hesitate to drop that in our Q&A box, and behind the scenes we're watching those and we'll ask those questions. So let's just jump right into it. Sarah, well, first, welcome to the Ask the Expert stage, and let's kick it off and share with us some of your involvement in farm stress and why is this topic so interesting to you?
So David, I think a few years ago, as I started as a high school agriculture teacher in my career, and I saw students facing, stressful situations and not having those coping mechanisms. And fast forward to 2013 when I started working with OSU Extension. As I moved from students, I still had students, but they were just more adults in fashion, and they're those farmers that we work with day in and day out. And I could see those stressful situations with prices and weather and those different things. I had a chance to delve into some training with Michigan State and Michigan State Extension, and it gave me some tools to help teach. But I think it came down to growing up on a family farm and still being involved in farming. I could still see more of that. But I was placed in a situation once with one of the extension programs I was at and talking a person down out of dying by suicide. And it was a thing that affected my life greatly. I think it changed my path of where I felt we need more of this and we need more help and more connections. And OSU Extension is here and fit into those places where we can make those connections. So that's kind of my little background of where I started with the topic.
And it's amazing that Extension will soon show your calling. With that, with farm stress, let's talk about stress in general. How does it affect people in general? As we learn more, knowledge is power. What are some signs of stress? Or let's talk about stress in general. How does it affect us in general? We'll start there.
So perfect. I think, when we start to talk about stress, whether you farm or you don't farm, you start to think about those signs and symptoms. And we talk about how stress affects your body. I think when you get stressed out, maybe your heart races, or, you might get sweaty palms. It's some of those basic physical things. Your face might feel hot. You get shortness of breath, things like maybe you tap your fingers, or maybe you get a headache or anything like that. Those are just a few of those physical symptoms. And then, it starts to affect maybe your thoughts and your feelings. And I know my kids can tell you sometimes I get irritable or easily angered. And so I think, stress affects all of us differently, but maybe it's you can't concentrate. You have an inability to sleep. Maybe you're bored, again, nervous. And then finally, stress can kind of start to affect what you're doing. Things like maybe you overeat or you argue, or maybe you use drugs or alcohol, you withdraw. Maybe you sleep more. And so some of those simple things that we think about as we start to notice those, those stress in general that affects everyone.
Now, you mentioned earlier about suicide and, just so difficult, but just so appreciative that we as an agriculture community are talking about stress more, suicide and prevention. And so let's move more into that, this whole area of suicide, and help us. How do we know or see some of the symptoms if it's moving towards that?
So I think it's great, as I shared some of those different things. I think farmers, farm families, those working in agribusiness, you're being thrown so many curveballs daily. And farmers wear so many different hats. I think one of the things that I learned with my training, Dr. Michael Rossman, he has this philosophy called the agrarian imperative. And while farmers are, you're the scientist, you're the bookkeeper, you're the worker of many overtime hours as we lead into harvest and sometimes in planting. But they feel his philosophy was that, people that are agriculture, they're motivated by their basic human instinct. And they're genetically somehow programmed in that instinct to hang on to your land and your farm at all costs. And so he believed that, that instilled you to work incredibly hard. And I think you see that in families and the farms that we're all working with. You have the ability to be able to hold on to and endure pain and hardship. And then you take those uncommon risks with that agrarian imperative. And we see that drive in our farm families that we're working with each day. And I think, whether you're sitting there as the farmer, the other thing is you have that domain, you put the fence up and you have the farm sign. I mean, think about our farms as we go through our communities, that they have those big farm signs out, and this is my domain and this is what I'm doing. And it's that legacy and that lifetime that I've lived. But when we start to get into some of those threats like market prices and, disease outbreak in livestock, our weather changes that we're seeing, I think farmers would agree with Dr. Rossman where they say, hey, this is in my blood. This is how I grew up. And so with that, looking at all those things thrown at them, when they have that stress, David, they look at that part. A little bit of stress can be a good thing. But it gets to the point, and I think right now as we roll into harvest and we're harvesting here in Paulding County, there's that healthy tension. And then you hit that peak where you start to get really tired. And as you start to wear down, you go from stress or a good type of stress into a distress. And then, as that fatigue hits in, you hit exhaustion. And that's where we see those breakdowns. I think of farmers, they're truly our superheroes here. And so I always think of Superman as a superhero, and farmers can compare to that. And I think that with all these different things coming at them, just like a farmer has those things, Superman had that kryptonite when it came into play. And so when you start to notice those things, that's where we need to look at those different things, where maybe it's the farmer that you heard from every day, or they're not showing up to church, or maybe they're not at the coffee shop. You see a complete change. And this might come from someone working with them on the farm. Maybe it's a neighbor, a friend. And sometimes I think that's where we run into that side of where it gets so bad, when all those stresses are piling up and you can't break that down. And sometimes we have to talk about that suicide. And I will say, from the experience I had, I never would have thought about that. And I think one of the common misconceptions we hear is, when you start to talk about this, you say, if I talk about suicide, that person could possibly die by suicide, or I'm going to, have them go through and they might complete. And that's not the truth. But I think, you have to be able to know those signs. And we're just touching the surface today, talking about this. But looking at that, if you ask that question, are you having thoughts of suicide? And someone would answer yes, you have to go through with two more questions and say, do you have a plan? And if they say yes again, then have you secured the means? And I think it's a hard topic to talk through. But that's the one thing I think, if they say yes to all those questions, it's not leaving them alone and reaching directly out. We have lots of different prevention type of lines and things, but I think you have to know. And even if they answer no, I think it's just sitting there and listening, because with that stress that builds up, it's important.
Great. Lots of good food for thought there. Now, I think I've seen a shift here during COVID that we're talking more about mental health than we ever have, in our lifetimes. But there's always been this stigma around mental health. So let's talk a little bit about the stigma about mental health and some of your advice on that.
So I think, David, we live in these small communities. You think of that rural area, and there's a lot of attitudes and perceptions, and I think we have to break down some of those barriers. Things like, and those barriers can be as simple as, I'm not going to look for help because we don't have health insurance on some of those, when you're farming 100%. And that's one of the stigmas. There's a lot of different programs out there, and just being able to talk about this, it's so hard. There's that insurance coverage, there's that stigma. Sometimes it's just the lack of accessibility, in our small rural communities. We don't know, or can be on the flip side, I don't want someone to know that I'm reaching out for help because everyone's sitting there, and you sometimes feel that. It's your social network, and sometimes there's not a support system that's been developed. And so I think with COVID hitting, I think we've had that chance to look at those different, situations and being able to reach out a little bit more. And I think with, being a lot of the time stay at home, farmers, they're already all on their farms a lot of the time, and they have a lot of alone time, but being able to make some connections. They still had connections, whether it was as simple as a phone call or the Twitter world or whatever they connect with. I think, they have to keep making those connections.
Right. And I think it's just wonderful that we're talking more about this and breaking down those stigmas with mental health. I know I was really intrigued by your title, Finding Sunshine in the Storm. You picked that title for a reason, and I know I've read an article of you writing on this. You want to share a little bit about why that title, why you picked that title?
So, David, I think, as we look at all this, it can be scary talking about mental health and those different things and stress in general. But I think there is a resiliency, and there's an opportunity for people to find ways to cope and deal with these things. Sometimes it's just connecting the dots, and it can be as simple as, I found someone that I can talk to today, or I reached out to someone. And I think when stress affects people, they start to get to the point where it builds and it builds and it builds, and they might not be able to put one foot in front of the other. And as that sunshine, comes about, it's things like, I found this little thing like, hey, I'm just going to take a 5-minute walk, or I'm going to find something to do to unwind, or I'm going to take the time to go to my child's ball game, and it has to fit who you are when you're finding those coping mechanisms. I think one of the things, as simple as it is and as stressful as it is on farms, it can be just taking a big deep breath. And I think, as we think about stress, and no matter what job you're in, even 5 big deep breaths where you breathe in and you hold that, it's those connections that we can make to find those different things. And I think those are important, David, because there is a way to cope. And, sometimes it's hard in today's COVID world. David, I know you're the hugger, and when you can't do those things, it makes it hard. And some people are not that way, but I think you have to look at how that stress hormone cortisol builds up in your body, and you have to find ways. And right now, rolling into harvest, I mean, we've got lots of resources out there, whether it's eating right. And I think that's easy. When we're stressed, we tend to go for those bad foods and those things that aren't healthy for us. And I'm probably one of the biggest, proponents of saying I've had to change that to make things not as stressful. So lots of different things out there.
Yeah, and I think I heard, and you mentioned I'm the hugger, and I'm a handshaker. I'm old school. That's how we greet each other. I think someone said we need to drop the terms social distancing from our vocabulary and just call it physical distancing. And during this time, especially as we are in COVID, or when you are stressed, it's easy to socially distance yourself from each other, when really in COVID, it should be about physical distancing, not about this being apart from one another. So, and we had a question that came through the Q&A, and kind of ties into a question that I would have liked to ask you too. Given that money wasn't an issue, is there a program that you would design to help these farmers? And I would add to that, where are some resources and helps and some things that you would offer to folks that might be in a stressful farming situation?
So if money wasn't an option, I think that, I look at this other side of things, and being in our communities and lack of, I think, healthcare and that cost on farms, if there was that telehealth option and that opportunity where farmers could connect, and I know not everyone likes to connect how we are virtually and those type of things, but sometimes those resources or those lack of resources in our communities, I think that telehealth option would be a phenomenal one. But looking at that, there's so many other resources out there, you know, whether it's suicide and the suicide hotline that I did want to share. If you're in that phone number is that 1-800-273-8255. And you can also text for hope to 741-741. And that's available 24 hours. And I have a list of resources that we can put in the chat box as soon as I'm finished. But another one that's great that's come about, and Ohio State has a partnership with that, is the Iowa Concern Line. And that phone number is that 1-800-447-1985. And what's neat about that is it's available 24 hours a day also, but it is related to agriculture. And that can be things, it's free, it's confidential, it's trained professionals, but it can be legal, it can be financial information, it's, you know, general stress. It can be things like disaster help. And so as we look at those, that is a free resource that the university we've partnered with and worked through some grants. And then things is an awareness, I think, is understanding those things. There's lots of different trainings, things like trauma-informed care that you can go through, or mental health first aid, and we have resources to do those. And so I think, you know, all those things, there's lots of free training out there, and it can be everything, David. There's so many good extension websites and resources that I could go on and on. There's great podcasts. I mean, there's just so many different things that we can share.
And that is great, Sarah. Sarah, if folks want to follow up with you, what's the best way to get a hold of you? And we'll put that in the chat too, as far as your email address.
Absolutely. They can email me at Noggle, NOGGLE.17@OSU.edu, or our general extension office phone number is 419-399-8225, and that will ring directly into our office, and you can be connected with me. And I think, you know, David, that sunshine in the storm is being able to reach out and make those connections. And we're all in this together. I think we need to, you know, work through these things, and it's not a topic, like we said, that we talk about a lot, but I think it's come to the forefront. And whether it's OSU or it's your local clergy or anyone, there's lots of people reaching out and working in this area.
Well, Sarah, we appreciate you taking time this morning to join with us. You're going to be back on the stage here over the next couple of days, so we'll have you back. And if folks need to get a hold of you, again, that's noggle.17@osu.edu. And again, thanks for being a little sunshine for us today. We appreciate it, Sarah.
Thanks, David.
All righty. Have a great week.
All right.